The history of Middle-earth is filled with amazing structures found across the landscape of Tolkien's secondary world. Today, we will highlight the 7 wonders of the world found in the Third Age. A quick note, these are in no particular order, so please don't look at this as a ranking from best to worst or vice versa. So without further ado, here are my personal favorite wonders of the Third Age. The elven realm of Lórien lied west of the Anduin River, known in the common tongue as the Golden Wood. It was ruled by Lord Celeborn and the Lady of the Wood, Galadriel. Lórien was made up of beautiful Malorn trees with silver bark and gold foliage. Galadriel's power protected this haven from the evil of Sauron. This forest was the only one in Middle-earth that most resembled the glory of Eldamar, the home of the elves in Aman. For the most part, the elves of Lórien, known as the Galadrim, did not engage in the affairs of others around Middle-earth, except for times of dire need, when Elrond would call upon their aid. When the Balrog appeared in Moria in 1981 of the Third Age, many of the elves of Lórien fled south. When the Fellowship made their way into Lórien, they rested there for a month. When Gimli entered the Golden Wood, it was the first time in a great while that a dwarf had stepped into that forest. During the War of the Ring, soldiers of Sauron attacked Lórien from Dol Guldur, but Lórien did not fall. Once the ring was destroyed, Celeborn attacked Dol Guldur, and Galadriel demolished its pits. Once Galadriel sailed west after the War of the Ring, the Golden Wood was mostly abandoned. Lórien was called Dwymerdene by the Rohirrim, and was also known as the Hidden Realm, a true place of peace and ancient beauty. Helm's Deep was the setting for some of the most iconic moments in the history of Rohan, and during the War of the Ring was the location for one of the most critical battles between the free peoples of Middle-earth and the forces of Sauron. Helm's Deep was a ravine in the Ered Nimrais, the White Mountains, that ran from Minas Tirith in Gondor to southwestern Rohan. The main parts of Helm's Deep were the mighty fortress known as the Hornburg, the Deeping Wall, which extended from the side of the Hornburg to the mountain wall, Helm's Dyke, which was a defensive trench that ran the length of the valley, and the Deeping Stream, which ran through a channel in the base of the wall and flowed into the Aglarond, the glittering caves in the mountain beyond the ravine. The location of Helm's Deep was originally a Gondorian refuge and eventually was taken over by Rohan. In the Third Age 27, 58, and 59, the king of Rohan at the time, Helm Hammerhand, found refuge in the Fortress of the Deep when he and his men were under siege by the wild men of Dunland. Helm fortified himself and his people in the Suthburg. Helm survived the siege and kept control of the refuge during the long winter of that year. The fortress was then known henceforth as the Hornburg, for it was there that Helm Hammerhand blew his great horn and smote his enemies. Helm also became the namesake of the entire ravine thereafter. During the War of the Ring, the people of Rohan fled into the confines of Helm's Deep to prepare for a great battle against the army that Saruman had created. This clash was known as the Battle of the Hornburg. Although Saruman's forces were successful in breaking through the Deeping Wall via the Deeping Stream channel, Rohan, led by King Theoden and members of the Fellowship, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, survived the onslaught. And at the 11th hour, Gandalf the White entered the fray along with the remaining Rohirrim, and the enemy was crushed. There suddenly upon a ridge appeared a rider, clad in white, shining in the rising sun. Over the low hills the horns were sounding. Behind him, hastening down the long slopes, were 1,000 men on foot. Their swords were in their hands. Amid them strode a man tall and strong. His shield was red. As he came to the valley's brink, he set to his lips a great black horn and blew a ringing blast.
Erkenbrand,
"Erkenbrand!" the riders shouted. "Erkenbrand!" "Behold the White Rider!" cried Aragorn. "Gandalf is come again." "Mithrandir! Mithrandir!" said Legolas. "This is wizardry indeed." The hosts of Isengard roared, swaying this way and that, turning from fear to fear. Again the horn sounded from the tower. Down through the breach of the dike charged the king's company. Down from the hills leaped Erkenbrand, Lord of Westfold. Down leaped Shadowfax, like a deer that runs sure-footed in the mountains. The White Rider was upon them, and the terror of his coming filled the enemy with madness. The wild men fell on their faces before him. The orcs reeled and screamed and cast aside both sword and spear. Like a black smoke driven by a mounting wind, they fled. Wailing, they passed under the waiting shadow of the trees, and from that shadow, none ever came again. The Battle of the Hornburg is one of the most iconic moments in Lord of the Rings, and it was there that the heroes of the War of the Ring came together to win their first major victory against Sauron. Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower of Sauron, the Lord of the Rings. It was the primary base of the Dark Lord during his influence in Middle-earth. The tower was first built in the Second Age. Once Sauron created the One Ring, he used the power of the ring to construct the massive structure. After the War of the Last Alliance, the tower was crumbled when Sauron fell, and the ring cut from his hand. However, the base of the tower remained. In the Third Age, Sauron made Dol Guldur his abode for many years. In the Third Age 2941, the White Council drove the Dark Lord out of the ruined fortress. Sauron then returned to his home of old, Mordor, where he and his minions rebuilt the Great Tower. At the end of the Third Age, during the final moments of the War of the Ring, the Dark Tower was utterly destroyed, and Sauron finally met his end when the One Ring was unmade in the fires of Mount Doom. Imladris, Carningul, the last homely house. Rivendell was a place of dreams, an elven stronghold on the western rim of the Misty Mountains. In the year 1697 of the Second Age, the elven lord Elrond founded the refuge in a hidden valley in the land called the Angle, between the Mythithel and Bruinen rivers. Elrond established Rivendell after fleeing the destruction of Eregion during the War of the Elves and Sauron. Rivendell was covered by a great ancient elven power that protected it from outside harm. The Dunedain of the Third Age were greatly cared for by Elrond in Rivendell. Every chieftain of the Rangers of the North were raised within its walls, including Aragorn, who had become the King of Gondor and the reunited kingdom after the War of the Ring. Rivendell was a place for council and safe haven, and housed many important gatherings over the years, such as the White Council and the Council of Elrond, where the Fellowship of the Ring was formed. After the War of the Ring, Elrond, along with many of the elves that dwelt in Rivendell, left the shores of Middle-earth and sailed to the Undying Lands in the west. Only the twin sons of Elrond, Elladan and Elrohir, remained in Rivendell into the Fourth Age. No one knows when Rivendell was finally abandoned. Moria, the greatest of the dwarven halls under mountain, called in the dwarvish tongue Khazad-dûm, meaning dwarf mansion. The mighty dwarf city was built by Durin I early in the First Age, thus making it the ancestral abode of Durin's folk. Over the ages, the hall expanded and became a place of great splendor and majesty. The dwarven domain was made up of numerous levels, grand halls, and many mines. Once the First Age of Middle-earth was ended, dwarves from the Blue Mountains made their way to Moria after their homes were destroyed in the War of Wrath. Early in the Second Age, the dwarves of Moria first found mithril, the highly durable and precious metal used for chainmail and helms. This discovery of mithril brought great wealth to the dwarves of Moria due to its high demand amongst men and elves. When the War of the Elves and Sauron raged, the conflict that arose after the forging of the Rings of Power, the dwarves of Moria kept their gates closed, and thus were able to survive that war. In the Third Age 1980, the dwarves unearthed the Balrog, a demon of antiquity that had been hiding in the depths of the mountain. This same Balrog would eventually be encountered by the Fellowship of the Ring and meet its demise at the hands of Gandalf the Grey more than a millennium later. After the Balrog was disturbed, it proceeded to attack the dwarves of Moria on numerous occasions. Therefore, due to the great danger the Balrog posed, Durin's folk left Moria altogether. In the Third Age 2480, Sauron began filling the halls of Moria with orcs, and in 2790, orcs killed Thorin's grandfather, Thror, who had fled to Moria after the taking of the Lonely Mountain by Smaug. This led to the great conflict known as the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, which ended with the epic battle of Azanulbazar. The dwarves won the war against the orcs. However, they decided not to re-enter Moria because of the presence of the Balrog. In the Third Age 2989, about 50 years after the Battle of the Five Armies and the events found in The Hobbit, and more than a millennium after the dwarves had abandoned Moria due to the treachery of the Balrog, a large group of dwarves, led by Balin, marched to Moria to re-establish a dwarven stronghold there. 5 years later, in the Third Age 2994, Balin's company of dwarves were slain by their enemies. In the Third Age 3019, the Fellowship of the Ring, along with the creature Gollum who followed them, passed through the great halls of Khazad-dûm. There, Gandalf the Grey engaged in the epic clash against the Balrog, the ancient foe that had stalked the halls for a great length of time. During the duel between Gandalf and the Balrog, several locations within Moria were broken, including the chamber of Balin's tomb, Durin's Bridge, and Durin's Tower, which sat at the top of the mountains above the hall. The White City of Gondor, Minas Tirith. Built in the year 3320 of the Second Age, the site was originally a fortress of the southern kingdom of Gondor. Elendil ruled the northern kingdom of Arnor, which was located in Eriador, the northern lands of Middle-earth, west of the Misty Mountains. The sons of Elendil, Isildur and Anarion, both ruled Gondor from the city of Osgiliath. Isildur oversaw the construction of the eastern fortress of Minas Ithil, where he planted a white tree of Numenor, using a young sapling he had saved from the island before its destruction. His brother Anarion constructed the western fortress of Minas Anor, the original name of Minas Tirith. In the Second Age 3429, Sauron began an assault on Minas Ithil, and Isildur escaped, taking with him a seed from the white tree he had planted there. Anarion found refuge in Minas Anor until the army of the Last Alliance came to his aid. In the aftermath of the War of the Last Alliance, Isildur planted the white sapling tree at Minas Anor in remembrance of his brother who had fallen in the war against Sauron. The throne of Gondor then passed to Anarion's descendants. Centuries later, the line of Anarion ended when King Eärnur went to challenge the Witch King of Angmar, who had taken over Minas Ithil, renaming it Minas Morgul. At this time, Minas Anor became known as Minas Tirith, the Tower of Guard. Eärnur was inevitably slain, and no living heir of Anarion lived. The leadership of Gondor then fell to the stewards, who ruled Gondor until the return of King Elisar at the end of the Third Age. Despite the turbulent years and hardships Gondor endured in the Third Age, including the Battle of the Pelennor Fields during the War of the Ring, the White City of Minas Tirith survived into the Fourth Age. The Númenóreans that founded Gondor possessed great knowledge of stone and monument construction, and the majesty of Minas Tirith was proof of this, a shining beacon of hope that stood the test of time. The Argonath, the Pillars of the Kings. Two giant statues flanking the Anduin River, just north of the Falls of Rauros. The site marked the northern border of Gondor. Each colossus was carved in the images of the two sons of Elendil, Isildur and Anarion, the original lords of Gondor. The structures were built to intimidate any foe who dared enter the lands of Gondor. Each statue's left arm was stretched out in a pose of resistance. They stood for centuries as the power of Gondor diminished, and the reign of the kings ended. In the year 3019 of the Third Age, the Fellowship made their way down the Anduin and beheld the massive Argonath of old, a symbol of the ancient power of Gondor, and a reminder of how impressive the Númenóreans were at constructing epic sites. The Argonath is my personal favorite of the great structures of the Third Age. Its imposing aura has always fascinated me. Before we wrap up this video, I wanted to include some honorable mentions, such as Isengard, Meduseld, Weathertop, Erebor the Lonely Mountain, the White Towers of Lindon, Minas Morgul, and the House on the Hill, Bag End. So friends, what do you think about these 7 wonders? Do you agree? Are there other wonders of the Third Age that you love? Let me know down in the comments. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're a fan of Middle-earth. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope all of you are well. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.